Now it's time for a Q&A. And since we have some few new people, I will just remind what a Q&A is. It's a question that ends with a question mark, and we are inviting people from the audience to ask questions. But I would like just take the first opportunity because it's always nice. And this one is going to be a little bit of a silly question, and it was just inspired by your slide, Somya. You had not the lithium mine, but you had an image of a mine before that. Do you remember which mine it was? No.
One of the early slides could be copper, lithium, or cobalt. These are
the lithium, which was the beautiful. I mean, it looks beautiful.
Yes.
But there was like one that went down, and it just made me think. Since this is called late-stage digitalization, and I thought like this kind of looks like a pyramid. And then I was like, wanted to ask, do you think like people in 2,000 years are gonna go visit these mines and think this is some sacred kind of spot?
Well, yes, sacred spot of environmental degradation. Yes.
Okay, but do we have questions from the audience? Okay, Ramin has a microphone.
Hello, yeah, my name is Renato. I'm gonna play a little bit of devil's advocate here. There's a lot of arguments that AI will be used to make AI more efficient and take less resources and make it more sustainable. What do you think about this argument? And if you think that it is the case, what's the timeline that we would have more sustainable AI and data centers and things like that?
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, I can give, my answer is not going to be as technically rigorous as Somya's, but I think this question of will the AI make AI more sustainable is a little bit tricky, because I think the other question that I would ask is, will humans use AI to help figure out how to make the AI more sustainable? So all technology is going to be imbued with the values of the people who use it. And so I think this question of like, will AI make the AI sustainable? I think we as people need to make that decision that we want it to do that first. And of course, there will probably be trade-offs with that. But I think it's a very powerful provocation of, could humans decide to use AI to then make that more sustainable?
Yeah, I agree. And I think that there are already some advancements happening in that field to make AI, for example, the training and the inference models more efficient, less energy intensive. AI is being used as a tool to save water in many areas. But I always go back to something which is the Jevons paradox, which is the rebound effect. When you make something more efficient, you make it cheaper, more accessible, the demand goes way higher, and then you end up actually having a bigger footprint. So that's something to be mindful of.
Did you feel you got an answer, or you can totally follow up, and devil advocates are very welcome. Do you have another question? Yeah, here? Yeah, you can also go there. You can make decisions. I love that.
Thank you, Duke from the Netherlands. Maybe an open question to both of you. Linking back to the keynote this morning by Anna Jain, she mentioned this tension of individual actors being isolated and therefore not in competition and not being able to make the choices that are necessary to go towards a better future. And it resonates a bit with me regarding this discussion of digitalization and AI, that right now everybody feels the necessity to be part of this competition, right? To be part of the progress. The company I work for is training its own large language model as well, because we need to have one for Netherlands, we need to have one for Swedish. How can we best discuss these responsibilities of these individuals and organizations without getting into a sort of rat race effect or runaway effect, where we get to a deterministic technological future because we have to have this technology? So it's a bit of a complex question, but I hope you can make something poetic out of it.
I mean, my gut goes to thinking about the individuals. I think it's hard to know how the organizations are all going to shape out. It's hard to see, like, AI is a research field also, and it's kind of unpredictable where AI will go. Who knows? People are saying right now that maybe AI is plateauing in research land. So, I mean, just to start on the organizational level, I'm not sure that I would be able to predict how organizations should handle this. But I think at an individual level, yeah, there's like a crazy demand right now for everyone to add AI to things, to stay competitive. How do you have like the newest and greatest technology? And I think you can still think about like how I can use the latest and greatest technology. Like I'm a pretty firm believer that AI can be used in a lot of places. I just think sometimes we think about it in the wrong way. I think a lot of times people are leaning to use AI as like an automation that sort of like they like let AI go and do the thing and like hope for the best and that it will all work. And I think taking that sort of like, okay, we're gonna use AI as like a silly intern approach to like running at a problem is a little bit different than if you were to say, okay, like how can I make a tool that acts more like a supercharged paintbrush for an individual and give like more autonomy and agency to an individual that has these AI tools. Okay, so to circle back to what you were asking, I think it's tricky because I completely understand the sentiment that so many people are asking for AI and things to say stay competitive. And what I'm saying is sometimes there are ways that you can like add some nuances of let's use just AI in a smarter way that isn't the like gut reaction to just like let it go do the thing instead. Does that kind of answer your question? Okay.
I can just add that there is an analogy in climate governance as well. So you have net zero targets and different countries reporting their emissions in different ways and going about it in different ways. There's competition and all that. So similarly with AI, I think if we put too much weight in the individual companies to take the charge here, I think that's going about it the wrong way. The governance needs to be an extension of national boundaries because it concerns all of us. And this FOMO effect of, yes, if we don't use AI, we'll be left behind, is what's kind of creating this race to the bottom.
I think, just to adding also what we had Andy Norgren from Unity Technologies talking about here yesterday, which was, in the end of the day, when you deal with like large code bases, they require maintenance. And then when you, in a company, generally speaking, project managers, people who sell things, they need new things that they can sell. And one of the things that Andy was saying is like make an awareness about the maintenance before you just add new things, right? And I think it's also like maybe in an organizational form, finding the language and the ways of explaining that, like, not just add it, but also make sure that the maintenance required for this and the knowledge, as I feel like you very much talk about, the literacy. Do you actually know what this means, right? And I think in some ways, again, maybe it's not the separation of humans and AI, but it is actually to think about the humans and our systems and how we decide these. So we don't separate too much here. Do we have more questions? Let's go one towards the back. So there are two back. You can maybe go on that side over here. And we will come to here afterwards. The microphone is being passed on. It's beautiful.
Thank you for your talks. Is this on? Yes, it's on. I just want to ask two questions, but I know this might eat time. I'm wondering, Somya, if you could say a little bit more about the tragedy of the commons. And then a completely different question for Trudy is this whole idea of getting under the hood. I have this sense that if we get under the hood, we might be able to customize or opt out of some of the more negative or worrying characteristics of AI. But I realize this might be technical naivete because an LLM has to function as an LLM. So I'm wondering, if we're under the hood, to what extent could we treat the algorithm as plastic and maybe make it less damaging, less invasive, less black boxed, or whether the technology is actually going to prohibit that even from the start? I'm sorry for two such separate questions, but this has been a really interesting
We can
session.
handle complexity.
Yes. So on the tragedy of the commons, I was reading Elinor Ostrom's original work on how do we govern what we consider the commons, whether they're, ecosystems as commons, or in this case, the ecosystem of technology, which is what goes into the green revolution or the AI transition. So when we look at, for example, what I presented on the water footprint or the energy, when we look at data, and who owns it, the governance of that needs to come from a sense of collective belonging that is currently what is missing. And I think it relates to the first question of, can we actually leave that to the company level? And my stance would be no, that it has to be treated like a commons for it to actually do good.
Are you, and just to be clear, are you here talking the algorithms has to be commons, or the data pool that is like they're trained on?
I would say the whole ecosystem of it, that is the computation, the data, the resources, the material resources of it as well, because currently that's not the case. Yeah.
You feel okay? Then we can pass on to Trudy. Do you still remember the question?
Yeah. So the question, as I'm interpreting it, is how can we kind of like, can we shape the actual LLMs themselves to sort of remove this dangerous bad behavior? There are so many brilliant people working on this. And I think especially as a non-technical audience and as non-technical like builders and question askers, I think it's tough to think about this closed ecosystem that Somya also touched on of these like giant infrastructure level AI models. I think like the AI models out of the giant companies like Gemini from Google, GPT-4 from OpenAI, these are things where you're not going to be able to go in and tweak the model because these are proprietary, excellent models from giant corporations. But instead, what I think you can do as someone on the outside of these companies is you can think about, okay, at a like algorithmic level, how do these models work? What are the types of responses that I do and I don't like when something's not deterministic? Like sometimes these models can give wonky answers. How can I design a tool or an interface or a system around expecting these unexpected answers? And I think actually the injection point for the type of thing that you're asking about, of like how do you mitigate bad behavior, I think as like non-AI researchers, the best way that we can frame mitigating that is actually in how we design the interfaces and how we set up the systems for where the AI is injected into these workflows. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Cool. I think now it's time for a question from this side over here. And there was one person I kind of overruled before. And then we can move forward. You're very good at being quiet doing this. Thank you.
Okay, so it's kind of on the same topic because I wanted you to say something about the role of regulation here. I mean, the EU introduced its first AI Act. It was January this year or something like that. That being said, and this might be a question then to Somya, is like, even though you might have regulators or someone who is not a company coming in, from what I heard, what was the kind of discourses or narratives in the EU that was taking place before this was how the EU companies would have a competitive edge towards the US, privacy issues. It doesn't mean necessarily only because we have regulators that there will be some kind of commons thinking. So I want you to comment on that.
Yes, so it's definitely not an either-or case that if we have regulation or policy instruments can act as silver bullets. What the reason I mentioned the regulatory framework is that is our first entry point to put in some ethical principles into the development of AI. And I think the EU is definitely taking a lead there in terms of, if you look globally, today many nations and continents have their own AI strategies, policies, roadmaps. What is really important to note is that it's an entry point. It's an entry point to put in place certain sort of foundations of ethical practices, whether that's to do with labor or environment or the use of privacy and data. There's a lot of counter rhetoric being used that this is going to actually destroy the competitiveness of AI companies in Europe, and there is no evidence behind that. So it's a lot of, I would say it's early days, but this is how the landscape is shifting.
Cool. Was it? You can. Okay. We have one more question up here.
In the front.
Sorry, I mean, I pointed this now. I just make a, sorry for overruling.
Hi, thank you for your talks. My name is Emily. I've noticed that through my kids, that the next generation use ChatGPT before they use Google search. I don't know, those of you who were here in June when students graduated from the gymnasium in Sweden, a lot of them had written on their trucks, "Thank you, ChatGPT." And my question is to you, Trudy. So until now, companies and organizations and entrepreneurs and so forth have prepared themselves or have worked intensively with SEO in order to end up high in the Google search. So it requires experts, either in-house or buying expertise for SEO. What would you say would be the new expertise that companies and individuals and organizations will need in order to end up in the answers of ChatGPT?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. For people in the room who aren't familiar with SEO, this is a leveraging of the algorithmic foundations of PageRank. So like I talked about, basically in PageRank, you show up the highest on search results if you have the most links pointing to your website. So things that happen in SEO, one of the exploitations of leveraging this algorithm is you can basically like make a cluster of like a different node of things that just point at each other, and you can have like circular pointing at each other in SEO to basically raise your search result ranks. And I'm actually really glad that you brought this up, because this is an example of when you understand exactly the algorithmic foundations of what's happening under the hood, you can kind of game the system to then have your website show up at the top. And that's exactly what SEO is. So it begs a question of what would that look like for generative AI responses. And so if I had to guess how those types of things would happen, it's because an AI model is learning the patterns of how humans talk. So when it's seeing the same patterns over and over again, it's updating its probability to be more likely over and over again. So you could imagine a scenario where someone just like copy paste things a bunch of times because it'll show up the most in the training data. That could be an example of how things would maybe show up as more likely in an AI model. Again, there are like excellent mitigations within Google for this type of exploitation of SEO. There are lots of brilliant researchers who know that this is a possible type of exploitation and are looking at how to get high quality training data, because there's a phrase in AI of like trash in, trash out. The model is only as good as the training data you give it. So yeah, excellent question. There are lots of people who don't know exactly what that would be, but mitigating that risk comes at understanding at a foundational level how the algorithms behind AI work. Does that sort of make question? I'm trying to answer your question of like how it could happen, and then also just we need to understand how.
I understand it's a complex question. It may have many answers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was looking for maybe a concrete tips of.
Oh, you're like, how do I?
I'm guessing there are more people in here who have the same question.
How do I get remembered by an LLM? Yeah, that's honestly kind of poetic. I don't know, have like easily readable websites on the internet. Try and put if you have like a website or something, make it very readable. But sometimes also you might not, because they're giant average like reflections of the internet. So
I guess just to add on this, I guess also there are, I mean, now you paralleled them between each other, like the PageRank and the transformer model, but those two are inherently also very different. And what they allow you to do is different, right? So what the PageRank is like, find existing information, where the transformer model is actually generate new things. And I've guessed to some extent the literacy and what you can get from this is maybe not so much like how do you retrieve certain information. I mean, that's probably high school, are you still using this? But it's also then to generate certain answers, right? And I guess it must have to do with some form of creative expression. And there's like another very nice internet person that is called Elon. And his whole point, like he's a teacher and he realized a lot of his students are using AI to give him answers, and he kind of like in the beginning was annoyed and tried to use all these ways to kind of figure out, has this been used? But then he realized this is, maybe there's another approach, and maybe it's not a question, is this made with or without AI, but it's maybe like, what did this student actually want to say? So he started to say, what is the expressiveness of what he's receiving as a teacher? So it's like, is this made from someone to someone for a specific context? And then actually like thinking about it this in expressive terms is something that he can grade on. And then it's actually not so relevant if it's AI or another technology, like we had the underlines if you are autocorrected, right? Like, so you had always tools that help you. And for me, that's at least one way to think about, like, what is it actually that you want to express with what you have at hand, would be my answer.
Yeah, I mean, I love that point also of like, maybe just because of how AI generation works, it's like not conducive to having small individuals show up in the same way that searching and looking for like that handmade ceramic mug might be if you're trying to find a very like small individual. But you also might be like super famous and like you'll have no issue showing up in the AI model too. So there's that. Yeah.
Now I will stop the Q&A. And before I will let you to go to the lunch, I want to show you one thing, because in the morning I also work with the eelgrass, and I'm very proud. But also, it's very, very fun. And in the session after lunch, we are going to continue the conversation about manufacturing materials, and it's very, very much going to be about rethinking what kind of materials we are and how can we develop a larger compassion with materials. And one thing that I hadn't really thought about when I was doing this is that it really smells in a very specific way. And this smell from this eelgrass reminds me directly of my childhood, because my dad and also my mom are from a part of Denmark where there is access to a lot of this eelgrass. So I spent all my summers swimming in water and playing with eelgrass. And then now my hands are really like smelling like childhood, which is kind of nice. And just to say, if you think that this material and eelgrass is very far from what we just spoke about, then I think Somya's point of that computers, they run on water, they need the water to cool down, and the computers are in the end of the day made of sand, I think is a very clear reason that materiality and digitalization are two things of the same side. Thank you. Please give a warm hand to Somya and Trudy.